Hey everyone, welcome to the Slingshot Group podcast. I'm your host, Tim Foote, CEO of Slingshot Group, where we build remarkable teams through staffing and coaching. Now, if there was one thing that you could focus on that would determine whether a leader on your team stays or goes, thrives or doesn't thrive, you'd want to focus on it, right? Well, that's why today we are talking about culture. And there's nobody better to talk on this topic than Jenni Catron from the Foresight Group. So take a listen to this. Well, Jenni, welcome to the Slingshot Group podcast. I've known you for years, but have loved getting to know you more in recent times. And we obviously share a passion for healthy teams and healthy culture. That's kind of where our two organizations intersect. And you have such incredible insights and resources to offer teams trying to build healthy culture in organizations. So let's start off this conversation with some rapid fire questions so our leaders can get to know you. Jenni, you ready for this?
Oh no.
You trust me?
I was going to say, should I be scared, Tim?
No. You shouldn't be scared. And gut response here. Now, and I should say for our listeners, we're recording this in the middle of an afternoon of a busy day. And so I give you grace here, Jenni, if you need to just take a moment to think. Okay. So here's some rapid fire questions. Okay. What's your favorite city to visit?
Oh, favorite city to visit? That is a fun one.
Milwaukee?
Milwaukee.
No. Pass.
No. Too close. You know what? It's probably Nashville because I lived there for 20 years. When I visit Nashville now, first of all, it's like you're going back, you're seeing friends that you haven't seen and all the catch up. But then also it keeps growing and changing. And so every time I'm there, I'm like, what has happened now? Yeah. So that's the first one that came to mind.
Nashville's a great city. Okay. Coffee or tea?
Oh, tea all the way. Yeah, I am a tea snob, Tim. Like it is. It's a thing. It's a thing. I blend my own blends of tea. Wow. I have tea shipped from England. It's a thing.
Hot tea.
Mm-hmm. Hot tea and iced tea, but like hot tea. I'm kind of. It's kind of a thing.
So Jenni, my wife is British, so I'm all about the hot tea. And Australia too, of course. We drink tea there.
Yeah, of course.
If it wasn't for my afternoon coffee, we wouldn't be able to have this conversation. So I would have to say coffee. What about favorite?
Do you know, I've never had a cup of coffee in my life.
Oh, gosh. Yeah,
Is that not crazy?
That is crazy. That's an interesting thing.
I was going to say, there are probably... there's probably very few people that can say that. I've had a sip, and now, because people are like, you need to drink coffee. And I'm like, I don't like this stuff.
And now you can't because you want to be able to keep saying that because that's an amazing stat, stat.
It's an amazing stat, yeah.
But I would say this to you, and this is not a podcast about coffee. A really good brewed cup of black coffee can sometimes taste like tea. I'll just leave it there.
Really?
Yeah. Next question. What about favorite way to spend a weekend?
Oh, outside, somewhere near water and or working in my yard. I love being outside on a beautiful day. Yeah. That's an ideal weekend.
There's something about working outside with the work that we do, Jenni, that is just so refreshing because nobody else really weighs in. You do a job, you get it finished the way you like it, it's complete, and you have a sense of achievement. I totally get that.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
What's a book that has left a mark on your life and leadership?
Ooh. I think the top of the list is Ruth Haley Barton's Strengthening the Soul of Your Leadership.
Great.
That is a longtime favorite.
Great. Favorite movie or TV show?
Ooh. Now that's tougher. So I'm going to go way back. When I was a little girl, I loved the Carol Burnett show.
Oh.
So this is going way back. We probably have some listeners that are like, I've never even heard of that because I think it played in reruns when I was a kid. So I didn't even watch it so Carol Burnett, I think, is just fascinating. She's a comedian. She's hilarious. But I think I loved it because it was a female who led a show in, back in the 60s and 70s. And anyway,
we could go down.
So I'll go way back with the Carol Burnett show.
Avenues with that one, but we'll move on to the next question. Mm-hmm. That's great. If you weren't CEO of Foresight, working with organizations on culture, what would you be doing?
Oh gosh, that is a hard question to answer. Every once in a while, my husband throws that out at me. And I'm like, I can't imagine doing anything else. I mean, I can't, maybe I can't imagine not working with leaders in some shape or form. And so it might be somewhere else doing something else. But it's hard to envision.
Yeah.
I think I'm doing what I'm called and gifted to do.
Well, I think, Jenni, when you keep saying yes to God and he keeps leading you, you end up in that spot where you can't imagine doing anything else. And so my last rapid fire question is one that we would often end the podcast with, but I'll begin it with this question. And that is for the young leaders of nonprofits and churches listening to this podcast today, what's some advice that you would give them?
The advice that I would give young leaders is lead yourself well. I think that's a lesson that I just keep learning over and over again, is how important self-leadership is to both yourself and your growth, but also the impact we have on others. So I think that's the thing that I just keep learning, is the ripple effect of our influence on others can be so significant, either positively or negatively. And so one of my little axioms I live by is lead yourself well to lead others better. So I would just say, hey, double down on leading yourself well, digging into the self-leadership, emotional intelligence, self-awareness, just such an important part of our health as leaders.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because having spent years in the organization that I now lead, I would say one of the biggest things that I have learnt is that my self-leadership now as leader of the team is the biggest gift
That's right.
I can give to the team.
That's right.
And so that's a great reminder, Jenni. What about anything different for young and aspiring female leaders?
Oh, that's a great question. I think I always just want to encourage women leaders to really value the uniqueness they bring. I think sometimes, especially this was true for me in my early days of leadership, that I felt like I had to fit in and try to fit in with the guys, because I was often the only female at the table. This was true in the music business days before I was in ministry. It was true in my ministry days. And I felt like I had to adapt to fit in, rather than recognizing that some of the unique perspectives and insights that I have as a female are actually really valuable at the table. And so if I were encouraging a young woman leader, it would be just identifying that and recognizing that you might see things a little bit different. You'll bring a little bit different perspective, but that is actually what the room needs, versus now bring that in a thoughtful, humble posture, right? You're not coming in trying to just bring an agenda, but you are bringing perspective that's really valuable. And so I think when we can honor that and bring that forward and have confidence in, I'm going to see things a little differently sometimes as a female leader, but that actually might be really beneficial. And so how can I share that? How can I offer that up in a way that just brings additional perspective and insight, so that we can lead our team, lead our organization, lead our ministry better?
Right. You touched on it there a little, Jenni, some of your story and your background, and I'm fascinated by that, because you've had experience working in the music industry, in the corporate setting, but also in executive leadership at some great, well-known churches. And now you're serving all kinds of organizations across nonprofit, churches, some for-profit, especially around the area of leadership and team culture. So how did the good, bad, and ugly of the corporate and ministry settings shape your focus on the area of team culture?
Yeah, gosh, it's so fun, right, Tim, to look at the threads. Like you said earlier, when you say yes to God, he just opens doors you didn't think or even imagine. And I look back and I see that now. If you had asked me 25 years ago if I would be focused on leadership and team culture, I would be like, it wouldn't even been on my radar. That's the crazy part of it, right? But my experiences in those organizations really shaped it. So I'll try to say this briefly, but basically when I was I was 23 years old, dropped into a corporate environment in the music business. It was my dream job. And I was there 9 years, and I had two very stark experiences. The first team that I was a part of was really a phenomenal culture, just great team, great leadership, very aligned, very unified, just having a blast, working hard, but having a blast. we got merged with another division of the company. So same parent company, but we got merged with another division. And overnight, my experience went from one where I was loving work to absolutely loathing it. And it just created this angst in me trying to figure out what changed. I mean, yes, my boss changed, my team changed, but functionally, like who was paying me and all of those things did the actual like job function I had didn't change. And then I began to really unpack it. And it was all about the culture. It was the team dynamics. It was the leadership. And so I just started taking some ideas from that. And then fast forward, I stayed about another year and I realized this is not the best long-term seat anymore. I was invited to come on staff at the church my husband and I had helped plant. And that was a whole nother journey in and of itself to kind of say yes to God to something that was not on my radar at all. And but I realized moving into that role, I was moving into the role of executive director at a fast-growing church in the Nashville area. And I realized that now I was sitting in a seat where I was more intentionally shaping the culture that the rest of the team was going to experience, right? So I had been more of we all shape culture, we all influence culture, but in a large organization, in the role that I had held in the music business, I didn't have disproportionate influence on the culture. I was more of a recipient of it, right? But here I was going into the executive director seat, and I was going to be shaping it. We were small and fast growing. I was going to be hiring a lot of team. And that really impressed upon me how much leaders impact culture and then how intentional they need to be about understanding what are we really defining, who do we want to be, and what is it going to take for that to be true. And so that was really the heart and spirit of it, is that I recognized now I really had to shape it. And I just became really committed to figuring that out. And, lots of bumps and bruises and mistakes along the way, but it just kept informing my real passion around the importance of leaders being thriving and healthy and teams being thriving and healthy so that we can really do the work that we feel called to do.
Jenni, let me pull a thread on that time in the music business where you had the merge. Mm-hmm. How disappointing was it to go from incredibly happy in your role to unhappy? And how did that shape your leadership growth?
Oh, Tim, it was awful. Like I look back at it and I think, okay, here was this, this kid I was still in my 20s, right? And I'm like, but it was so discouraging. It was like I had such a phenomenal experience in my first handful of years of work. And it literally went overnight from like getting up, energetic, ready to go, ready to contribute at a high level. I mean, I went above and beyond, in the first scenario, to the new team and the new dynamic. Like I was barely showing up. I was taking my full lunch hour and I was out of the door by 5 p.m. Like I was giving the bare minimum, and that's not my personality at all. But I lost all like sense of enjoyment, contribution. Like so it really impacted my experience in a really, I mean, just a huge way. And, And I'll tell you what I did in that season, Tim, is that at the same time I began to I've got to study this. Like, so I had this little journal that I kept in my drawer at work, and I dearly hope nobody found this journal, because it was my place to like just write and reflect on what I was experiencing, because I thought someday I want to remember this so I don't repeat it. And there's a bit of arrogance in that. But it really was I'm just committed to learning through this because I want to make sure no other person ever has this experience with work. And I know that's a pretty lofty goal, but again, we were still doing really, really good work. But because the culture was just not healthy, it was a miserable place to be.
Hearing this story and that back in your 20s, it's clear to me listening to this story why you are doing the work that you're doing now. And when you talked about your reaction, it doesn't sound like it was a proactive reaction that you would take the long lunch hour, that you would leave at the end. But it does sound like quiet quitting.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah, what did how did that experience help you be more understanding of that phenomenon that has happened in recent years?
That's a great question. No, yeah, exactly what you said, right? It gives me more compassion and understanding, and it makes me go, okay, if somebody's quiet quitting, why? Because it's rarely, a lot of times we assume it's a behavior problem, it's an attitude problem, but it's often a culture problem. It's often there is something amiss in our culture, and we've got to get to the bottom of it as leaders. And so I think the quiet quitting thing sometimes is portrayed as just people who don't want to work. And I think you're exactly right. Like, my experience was, it's not that I didn't want to work. In fact, my track record had been, I'm ready to give it all. Like, I mean, I was, I'm always borderline, workaholic. And so there's all kinds of balance.
Over-responsible.
I like that. Over-responsible. I like that. And so it was actually so defeating to me to be in a place where I felt like I couldn't contribute at my best. And so, yeah, I think it should, when we see quiet quitting, it should grieve us as leaders, and it should make us curious to figure out, okay, what's going on? What is causing that individual to not contribute in a more meaningful way? And I think just digging a little bit for, is there something that I don't understand or I don't see that's affecting this individual?
Yeah, that's good. Jenni, you alluded to the leader's effect on the culture of the team. And from your experience in working in and with teams, is there a difference between a toxic culture and a toxic leader, or are they one and the same?
That's a really good question. I think that it is possible to have a toxic culture and your leader, direct leader, not be a toxic leader. I think if the senior leader of the organization is a toxic leader, it is hard for the culture to not be toxic. Now, it might take time. And I've seen scenarios where even if it's not toxic, but a very unhealthy senior leader, sometimes I've seen buffers in the organization that have kind of protected the rest of the team from the culture getting super unhealthy immediately. But eventually it gets harder for that to not impact the whole culture. But I have also seen scenarios where, maybe a culture is pretty unhealthy or toxic, but you might have your direct leader might be a good leader. But it is hard if a culture is toxic, it is hard for that not to eventually take over, because what happens? The healthy leaders leave, right? So healthy leaders are not going to stick around if the culture is toxic. So I probably answered that in a zillion different ways, but it is hard to maintain and retain healthy leaders if the culture is toxic, would be the shortest way to say that.
Jenni, you and I both wish that churches and nonprofits could stand out and be known for having healthy, thriving cultures. I mean, we should be the city on the hill.
We should be.
And all too often, it's the exact opposite. We'll often have leaders coming to us looking for a new role because of a toxic environment. But we also know that no team is perfect.
That's right.
And there's a difference between dysfunction and toxicity. There's dysfunction wherever humans show up. You and I have talked about this. How can we diagnose the health of the team culture that we're in? Is it healthy, dysfunctional? Has it moved towards toxic? Give us some wisdom on that.
That's really good. And you're exactly right in that there's no perfect team. There's no perfect people. I often joke that every team has its dysfunction. It's just, do you have some organizational awareness of your dysfunction, right? Because then you can actively be working on that. But yes, if you're a leader or if you're an individual, looking at an organization, it does take some work to diagnose how healthy that team is, right? Because they're going to, just like you have your best foot forward as you're interviewing, they're putting their best foot forward in the interviewing. Yeah, everybody's on their best behavior. And so I think I would be looking for turnover. Like, is there a lot of turnover on this team? Particularly really at any level, but like if there is a consistent and revolving door in an organization, that's a caution flag to me. I would be asking more curiosity questions around that. I would probably be even seeking out some of those former employees just to kind of get a sense of, hey, how was your experience? And tell me about that organization. I'd be asking around things like, mission, vision, values, which of course we all do. But then I'd be looking for, do I see those values in action, even in my interviewing experience, right? So if, let's say an organization has a value of, what do I want to pick? Let's say they have a value of believing the best of each other. Well, then I'm going to be looking for, do I notice that when I'm in an interview, do people quickly cheerlead and champion one another, right? Are they generous with praise of each other? Tim, in talking with you and Phil from Slingshot and the conversations we've been having lately, like you guys ooze like just praise and encouragement and compliments and, just what you value shows up just in conversation, right? Just how you guys interact shows up in the conversation. So I'd be looking for congruence or incongruence between what's on the wall, what are they declaring they want to be? And what am I experiencing in the conversations with others? If at all possible, I'm going to try to have some social interaction with members of the team. Now, I think this is good either way. You guys are the experts in hiring, so I'm going to defer to you. But like, if you're on the hiring side, I always want, like, if I'm hiring people, I want to get them in a social setting and I want to just kind of experience who they are when we're not in an interview mode. Well, you kind of want to do the same thing as the candidate of like, hey, can I get in an environment where I'm just seeing them interact? So if I'm there for meetings, but there happens to be an event, or, if it's in church ministry, a service or whatever it is, I want to go just see people interact in their, just in a more social or day-to-day thing. And again, see, is there congruence between what they say, who they say they are, and then what I experience in the behaviors within the team. So those are a few things top of mind that might have triggered some additional thoughts from you.
I want to dig into organizational awareness, because we always talk about healthy values in top leaders, and one of them, of course, is self-awareness. Right. You just hit on one for organizations, and it's organizational awareness. To those leaders listening today, how do you have better organizational awareness?
It's such a good question. And it's actually, like, I don't know, I want to say it's hard to do. It's not hard to do. It's just a commitment to do it. It is having rhythms for getting feedback throughout the organization. So, I think one of the things we have to acknowledge as more senior leaders is that the culture always feels better to us than it actually feels throughout the organization, because we're shaping our experience more. We hold more levers to what happens to us personally, where you get further into the organization and team members don't have as much control over what's happening, or, might not even have as much voice or say in what's happening. And so our culture is never as good as we think it is as the more senior leaders. So we've got to then really dig to understand what's happening, because people, again, are always going to put their best foot forward. They're rarely going to raise concerns, especially if we have a culture where that has not always been received well. So we have to have a rhythm of getting that data and getting that feedback. So I'm a big advocate of, there's lots of interpretations and perspectives on employee engagement surveys, but I feel like they're a data point. I feel like they at least give us a data point year on year or every 6 months of how are we doing and what is the team saying. So I think that's one point. We need to have our leaders. Here's the thing, Tim, that I'm noticing significantly right now is our people managers are not well equipped to know how to lead well. And they are often, and I don't know if you all experience this, I'm sure you do, but we promote people into roles of people management because they were great individual contributors. They were exceptional at their job. So we give them more responsibility by having them oversee the team. Well, that's a whole different skill set to manage people. And Gallup just released their State of the Workplace report, and some more data came out this year. I'll butcher the stats because I don't have them in front of me. But basically, it all comes down to the manager. Like people's experience at work is like disproportionately impacted by their direct manager. And so what I find time and time again is how our managers are leading is impacting people's experience in the organization. And so if you're not equipping your people managers well to know how to coach, give and receive feedback, create opportunities to learn and, wear that curiosity hat to understand where their team members are and what they need, and providing good leadership and coaching, if they're not well equipped with good management skills, there's a breakdown often in what senior leadership understands of the organization and what the employees are feeling throughout the organization. And so that's where our organizational awareness gap occurs, because our mid-level leaders, our people managers, if they are not giving and receiving feedback, if they don't have a good pulse on the dynamics of the team and what the team needs, and they're not translating that well to executive leaders, that's where I often see breakdown.
That's really interesting, Jenni, because we've got a lot of catching up to do in churches and kingdom-minded nonprofits in helping our leaders manage better and manage in a more healthy way. The buzz thing to say these days is management is dead. It is absolutely not. We've just got to work out how to do it more effectively.
That's right. It's gotten a bad rap, and really we actually need to understand the value of it and the significance of it.
And recast it and do it better.
That's right.
So, Jenni, one of the things that we'll say is if you need to shift and change culture, then you often need to hire on the outside. If you want to continue to grow healthy culture that you already have, then look for ways to develop your people and promote from within. If you have to hire on the outside and you want to continue to perpetuate healthy culture, what are some important things for leaders when looking at hiring key leaders from the outside that you find in your work?
Yeah, that's I would agree with your coaching or insight on that, but if you have to hire externally, being clear on your culture. So here's one of the things, Tim, that I notice, and this is one of the things the Foresight team is always helping organizations work on, is you intuitively know what you think your culture is, especially if your team is still relatively small. You often haven't clarified what you really mean by what is our culture, what defines our culture. So maybe you've done a little bit of values work, which is really important. And I feel like those are anchor points of good culture. But even going further in, what are those values? What are the behaviors and the beliefs behind those values? What do they look like in action? What are other things that have shaped us? So sometimes there are books or there are different voices or things that have shaped our culture, right? Like so really mining for what has shaped our culture and getting clarification around that, not just your instincts, but like, hey, we can say, this is what shapes our culture. Here's our values, here's our beliefs, here's our behaviors, here's the things that have influenced us over time. And so getting to that clarity is really important. And then with that clarity, then you can go look at, okay, as I'm interviewing and I'm hiring, I'm looking for somebody who aligns here. And I don't know all of your coaching, Tim, around hiring, but there's historically been the 3 C's, right? Character, chemistry, competence. The 4th C is culture. So that's what my coaching always is, add that 4th C. You've got it. But often we confuse culture and chemistry. And so the distinction there is chemistry is, I love hanging out with you. We went to dinner or we hung out on the weekend and it was awesome. Like we had a blast being together. But it doesn't always mean that they share your culture, because culture is how we work together to achieve the mission. So somebody could be awesome to hang out with, but they don't have the drive and the commitment to excellence maybe that your organization has, right? They don't have that or they might not value, one of the values that you hold in the same way. And again, they might have been awesome to hang out with, but they actually don't hold values in the same way that you do. So if you're interviewing somebody from the outside, just pay attention to the distinction. You're going to do character and competence, but pay attention to this distinction between chemistry and culture. And then really interview around, give me an example of a time that you just committed to your personal growth. So back to the self-leadership piece, that's a value Foresight holds, right? Self-leadership. Give me an example of the last time you pursued growth just for growth's sake. Tell me how your what does continuous learning look like for you? Or, so again, you're looking for some of those questions that help you go, do they have the alignment with the values that we hold? And so I think just being clear on what does your culture look like? How do you really define the culture for your organization? And then making sure that as you interview, you're looking for ways to test for that alignment.
I appreciate the reminder there, Jenni, that you can only do that if you're constantly revisiting who you are and understanding what defines your unique culture. And then you can craft those questions and those filters around that. And also the reminder that chemistry and just being a good hang can be a really dangerous filter if you don't weight it with the filter of culture and those other C's. Because otherwise you're going to end up with a team that's exactly like you. And what you don't do is grow. You just stay the same. You want leaders that are going to push you. Now, you kind of answer this question. I'm going to come at a different angle, though. There's so often a disconnect with leaders of the organization and the rest of the team. Have you ever seen that, Jenni?
Right.
In organizations.
Yeah. Every once in a while.
And how the leader assesses their culture, but how the team assesses the culture. I mean, we've often gone into organizations like you have, and the top leader, executive director, or senior pastor, or whoever's at the top of the organization, and the exec team has this echo chamber of health going on. And then you start to interview the rest of the organization, and a lot of them think that the place is a nightmare. What are some of the common blind spots of leaders that can negatively impact the culture of the team?
Ooh, that's such a good question. And again, it's such an important piece of awareness because here's what I often see. I don't know if I'll get at your question exactly the same way, but I think, I'm going to assume most senior leaders are well-intentioned, right? And so they gauge their culture on their intentions, right? Their intention is to have a strong and healthy team. I think most leaders are not just these tyrants that are thinking they're, especially in the type of organizations
and the
that you and I
pressure
serve.
that they face and have to deal with.
That's right. Right. And so the blind spot is they think that the team are as aware of all of the different myriad of things that are impacting them that maybe are inhibiting them from leading the culture, in the way that they hope. Like they're banking on everybody giving them the benefit of the doubt for all the myriad of things going on. And the reality is the rest of the staff don't see all the pressures and the issues and the things that the leader is navigating. And so they are responding to what they actually see and experience and feel. And so I think the blind spot for the leader is the reminder that the rest of the team don't see all of those things, nor should they. They're not in the senior leadership seat. They shouldn't be fielding all of the challenges that a senior leader is facing. That's why you're there. But you need to not expect them to give you have all the grace and the understanding for the things that you're responsible for. That's yours to navigate. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. I bet if you gave me a little more time, I'd come back with some more answers on that.
Let's take that one. How does a leader address that with their team? How does a leader address the pressures of their job that the team doesn't understand in a way that affords them more grace from their team? Have you seen some helpful ways to communicate that?
Yeah. sometimes it is to just acknowledge it. But so here's a careful line, right? You can look like you're just creating excuses or trying to defend yourself. So there's a discernment here that's necessary, I think. So let me give you an example. I'll use an example with my team. So I just got done turning in the manuscript for my next book. So my pace and intensity has been it's just been full for the last 6 months, between running the regular stuff of the business, my regular client work, and trying to cram a book into it. You understand these dynamics. My team doesn't see the hours going into the book. They know I'm working on a book, but sometimes the team just kind of expects that, well, that's just what she does, right? So it just kind of magically happens. Like they haven't written a book, so they don't know the amount of time or energy going in behind the scenes, and that's not theirs to carry. But a couple weeks ago, we were on a team call, and I knew I was fried, right? So my self-leadership and self-awareness was the acknowledgement that my fuse was a little short. And in fact, it showed up short in one of our meetings, right? Like I showed up with a little more intensity, a little more impatience than was appropriate for the moment. And so the meeting went on, and we got to the end of the meeting, and probably grace of God, I had a little awareness of how I had shown up in that meeting. And we got towards the end of the meeting. I said, guys, I need to apologize for how I handled myself earlier in the meeting. I showed up impatient, I was short, and I, named the specifics of the situation. I said, here's the thing. I realize I'm running on fumes. I've had a really busy last 6 months, probably, just more in the margins than is appropriate. So I've not been leading myself well in all of that. It's probably going to take me a little bit of time to get kind of rejuvenated. And so I just want to bring you into, hey, this has been a busier season than I probably even gave myself awareness for. And I know that that's impacted you. First of all, I'm sorry. And can you give me some grace as I kind of get myself, back into healthier rhythms? Did I do that all perfectly? No. But what I was aiming to do in that moment was acknowledge, hey, I got to have the self-awareness, the self-leadership to realize I'm not at my healthiest place. And here's why. There's actually a lot of, things going on that have impacted that. Can you give me just a little more grace to get through the rest of this book launch season? Because I realize that's probably impacting you in a not great way. I don't know if that maybe gets at a little bit of it, but I think as leaders, we've got to be not afraid to acknowledge it when we bump up against in that case, it was my capacity and my limits that was then impacting the rest of the staff and could have negatively impacted our culture, and might have, for that matter. I think there's a ton of grace in that moment, right? Then as I began to share, hey, here's what's going on. There's a few extra things really, just at play. And in fact, it might be a little bit intense for the next couple of months. Can y'all weather this with me? And brought them into it hopefully in an appropriate way. I don't know, Tim, you might give me some coaching on that moment right there.
That actually, well, firstly, thank you for sharing that personal moment. But what that reminds me of is how important vulnerability is in healthy leadership.
Right.
Because a leader who's vulnerable with those kinds of struggles is a leader that invites their team in a sensitive and appropriate way. So thank you for that reminder, Jenni, and thank you for sharing that.
Well, and let me say this, Tim, I did not want to, because I also want to acknowledge that, Pollyanna, it was all wonderful. It was all great. No, actually, it was in that moment in that meeting where I'm there's a part of me that's well, they should know. And, this is, everybody should be, on top of this, because I was frustrated with the situation that hadn't turned out in the way I hoped. And the appropriation or the frustration was appropriate in that we needed to do better on this particular thing. But the way I showed up was not appropriate because I was tired. And I didn't want to acknowledge it. It took me kind of wrestling through most of the meeting to come back at the end of the meeting and acknowledge, hey, I didn't show up at my best. Here's why. Here's what's going on. And so I want to also like not paint that picture as like, oh, Jenni handled that perfectly. No, it was a wrestle internally to go, but for the health of the team, if I don't reframe this moment, not in a like spinning it sort of way, but in a, hey, let me be honest, let me be a little vulnerable here, because it, so that it doesn't continue to erode our culture. If I had left that meeting and not acknowledged my frustration and acknowledging that I didn't handle myself well, I think it would have been a ding to our culture. And that was the thing that was driving me, because it was actually like nothing in me I wanted to just pout and so I want to just be honest with, that wasn't like what I really wanted to do. And it wasn't the easiest thing to do, but for my commitment to the health of our team was what drove me to do the thing that was uncomfortable for me.
That's a good reminder too. And, it's interesting, Jenni, we've talked about the Enneagram before. Right? There's so many great tools. That's one that I enjoy. I'm an Enneagram 2, which is great for the team that I lead until I show up unhealthy. And then I'm an unhealthy 8. And that's right. Not good for the team. And I've learned over the years that the teams we lead, the leaders we lead, they don't need our perfection. I mean, they know full well we aren't perfect anyway. What they need, and you've just demonstrated that so well for us, is our vulnerability to lean in together as we stay on mission together. And that's sometimes admitting the hard stuff like you did that day. Jenni, we could go on talking for another hour, and we're only hitting and I hope we have more conversations, and we're only just hitting the tip of the iceberg of this topic of culture. What haven't we discussed yet that you believe is crucial for leaders to know and do to positively impact their team and cultures? Like, what's a top tip or a light bulb moment that you've had recently for leaders leading teams or shaping culture?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Tim, these conversations are so fun, and I'm so grateful for you and the whole team at Slingshot and how committed you guys are. It's just these are the fun, partnerships and ministry friendships, of like, we just have such a love and appreciation for helping leaders and teams do well. So thank you for that. I think that the aha moment that I've had recently is we put a lot of time and energy. So one of my frameworks that I use often is there are 3 key things to every healthy, successful organization: a clear sense of purpose, a strong and healthy culture, and a strategy to make that mission happen. And what I've noticed is that we spend a lot of time on our mission vision as organizations, like that purpose block. Like, we put a lot of time and energy and labor into defining that mission, defining that vision. And then we jump to strategy. Okay, let's build the strategic plan. So we spend more days and time and energy in building out, elaborate plans and goals, which are all good, and I'm a big fan of. But how many of us have a plan for our culture? We leave it to chance, and it is arguably our most valuable asset in an organization is our people. And yet we often don't have a plan for that. And that's the piece that has kind of been the aha for me is, I think because culture and our people, we think relationships, especially in ministry or nonprofit settings where we're so mission driven, that then the people on our teams, we're so relationally invested, which I think is beautiful and brilliant. And yet we leave that part to chance. We aren't committing to really assessing where we are, defining where we want to be, getting really clear about that culture, and then building a plan to help us protect that and live into what we've defined. And so that's the part that I just am super committed to, is helping leaders say, hey, this is arguably the most important part of what we're doing. It's at least the most essential part to connect purpose and strategy together. And so really being deliberate to say, we need a plan. Culture needs a system. It needs a plan to really help us live into who we feel like God's called us to be.
Simplifying it down to those 3 buckets, Jenni, is so helpful, and not missing that culture bucket, which is so important. I mean, those letters HR in organizations got such a bad rap for so long until we started connecting those letters to culture and actually remembering those letters stand for our human resource. And it's the greatest resource we have.
That's right.
Which, Jenni, is why you and I are dedicating our vocation to helping it be healthy. And that's why I appreciate the work of the Foresight Group. And I would point everybody to getforesight.com for resources. Talk about the survey you've got there that will help people just as an entry level.
Yeah, for sure. Right at the top of the website. The website is getforesight.com. It's GET, the number 4, SIGHT. And there's a culture blind spot assessment. So it's like 12 questions. It's really simple. You can go, just respond to those questions to get a sense of, okay, do I have a blind spot? It's going to assess you on 4 different things. Do I have a blind spot when it comes to my culture? Maybe something that just needs some attention. And you can go take that. It's a free assessment. Great tool to just get you thinking about the things. That's the thing about culture is so many things impact the experience our team is having. And the more aware of that we are, the more action we can take on it. So would love for y'all to check that out.
A great place to start and great questions to ask as a leader about the health of the team and your culture. Jenni, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm looking forward to our next conversation. And thank you for such a great insight and all the work you do to serve the kingdom. We love partnering together.
Thanks so much, Tim. Grateful for you guys and grateful for the opportunity to talk today.
Well, I'm so glad you could listen in on that conversation about something that Jenni and all of us here at Slingshot are so passionate about, and that is healthy culture in your organization. How you steward the resource that is your people and wrap it all in healthy culture. I hope you don't just care about it, but I hope you do something today to continue to move towards health when it comes to your organizational awareness and your organizational culture. If this was helpful to you, please share it with another friend or subscribe. And until next time, stay curious and reach for the remarkable.